Hello and welcome back to my channel where I like to have fun with all things beauty while being critical about what I accept into my collection. Today I am doing a review of the new Mcgrath Mothership Petalmorphosis. So to help keep this video easy to navigate and somewhat organized, I'm going to break it into 5 sections. So I'm going to start with swatches. Then I'm going to go into my comparison swatches where I looked at my collection as it currently stands and I tried to find comparable shades to see if I could essentially dupe the palette. At that point, I'm going to talk about each shade individual because it just seemed like an easy way to both talk about the dupe I found, but also break the palette down shade by shade and talk about that at the same time. Then I'm going to talk about the 5 different eye looks that I've done so far with this palette, and I'll talk about, I used every single shade in the palette, so I'll talk about how that was. And finally, I'm going to go over everything that I've learned so far about the changes in the formula that we've seen in these more recent motherships. I've done a lot of digging on that. If you follow me on Instagram, you've probably seen me talk about this already. And at that point, I'm also going to talk about my personal experience purchasing this palette at launch. Unfortunately, the reason that this review is so delayed is because it took 8.5, almost 9 days for me to get the palette, and I bought it before it was officially released on launch day. Unfortunately, that wasn't the only negative thing that happened, but I'm acutely aware that not everybody wants to hear about that. So there will be timestamps below, and hopefully this will be easy to navigate whether you're looking at this because you have a similar skin tone or you want to hear me talk about the formula or whatever you are looking for. Hopefully I won't forget anything. I will definitely be revisiting this palette in the future where I can give more complete thoughts about how much use I actually got out of it. Obviously this is still early days. I haven't even had it in my possession for 48 hours yet, so I do plan on doing an update. So for now, let's just jump into a close-up of the swatches. I have no primer or anything down on my arm. I always do 2 different lighting situations. So I have my indoor lights and then I go outside. I do that for all of my eye looks as well, and my skin tone is medium, fair, very neutral. I am slightly cool tone, but mostly neutral, in case that is helpful as well, and I'll see you on the other side. All right, so before I get into my comparison swatches, I did want to take a moment and talk about this packaging. I mean, it is absolutely stunning. The box artwork is very nice. I will say I'm happy that at least this time my box came in one piece. I know that these are a little loose on the top and bottom, so I've definitely had damaged boxes before, so I'm glad I didn't have to deal with that. I did pick up the purple packaging, even though I do agree with a lot of other people when they say that they think that the color story looks better on the black. I agree with that. I think it pops a lot more, but at the end of the day, I appreciate the aesthetic of this more than I care about how it makes the shades look, I guess. So this is really pretty. It has an ombre metallic effect, so it goes from pale purple to a more pinky purple. And I love purple, so I was always going to go for that. I never factor packaging into my review of eyeshadow palettes because I really believe quality is above all else. That's my top priority. So I will buy a nice formula in a bad package, but I will never buy a bad formula in a nice package, if that makes sense. So if everything else is created equally, yeah, packaging matters to me. I like a luxury packaging experience, but I'm never going to put too much stock into that, if that makes sense. So anyway, this packaging packaging is beautiful. I am happy to see that that has not changed, as well as the price. I definitely was afraid that the price was going to go up with this one, and it hasn't, at least not yet. I mean, I'm sure it will eventually, but I was happy to see that that didn't happen yet. And yeah, that's it. So now I'm going to jump into the dupes that I found. I'm going to start by showing the overall effect of the dupe colors all together so you can see how close I was able to get. I will say most of my collection is either reasonably luxury brands, so Pat McGrath, Natasha Denona, Sephora brands, I guess you could call them, and indie. I have mostly indie. My collection is probably 60, 70% indie, and the rest is the luxury brands. I have 10 motherships. The only one that I don't have is Mothership 11. I have a bunch of quads and a good amount of her holiday stuff. I probably have between 100 and 150 eyeshadow palettes overall, so that gives you an idea of the kind of collection that I'll be pulling from, but I will show each palette as I get to it. So I guess I'm just bringing that up to give you an idea of what I'm working with. So without further ado, I'm going to go about this starting from this corner, and I'm going to do a top shade, a bottom shade, top shade, bottom shade, and go across the palette like that. So first up we have Divine Dawn. Now this is normally called Skin something in her other mothership. It's in every mothership since they started, well, except for the one that's all metallic, but every other mothership. And I'm happy to see that they've changed up the name of it, because calling it Skin anything was kind of odd. So I'm not mad about that. I do always appreciate the inclusion of that, to have something that's light and bright and a good inner corner pop. The one thing I love about Pat McGrath is all of the palettes have a good gradient from light to dark, and I appreciate that because I contour my eyes. That's just how I prefer to do my eye makeup. So it's not an exciting shade, but it's always a shade that I do end up using. To find something comparable to that, I could have picked from any number. There was one that seemed a little bit pinkier, but I don't know if it was the age of my palette or whatever. It got a little bit of hard pan, so instead I did compare it to this shade on the screen, and yeah, it's not an exact dupe. The one in the new palette definitely has a pinker undertone, and this one has more of a gold undertone, but because it is so light and it's actually on the eye, the difference is not huge. So I didn't want to spend too much time going over that one. The next one is definitely a lot more interesting. So that is the Nocturnal Bloom shade, which is this very interesting blue-green matte. What I found about this shade using it over time is that it's actually quite versatile. So in some images, it looks quite dark, almost black, to the point where before I bought this palette, I was worried that because I'm so pale, it would just look like a black shade on me, that I wasn't going to get any of the nuance of the greeny blue undertone. But that's actually not true at all. The green comes through quite strongly, and it can be built up or sheared out. So if you wanted to use this on its own and not use any of the other mattes, you could actually blend it out. Pat McGrath mattes are usually very useful in that way. So concentrated, it's quite dark, and blended out, it is quite green. But it's genuinely not like a green that I have. So I did try for a little while to find a dupe of this, and eventually I just gave up. Most of the dupes that I found similar pulled a lot more blue, and I did try to find my dupe quickly, so I didn't spend all day looking through every single eyeshadow palette that I own. But I wound up duping it with just a black shade because I felt like at the end of the day that was going to be the thing that was actually the closest that I had. The other thing that I wanted to mention about this shade is layering it. So if you layer it with either of the more purple or the peacher leading shade here, the other two mattes in the palette, you can actually get a gray or black undertone, which I did in one of the looks that I did yesterday. So I'll pop on the screen the two colors layered. That is Nocturnal Bloom and Lunar Nectar, which is the more pink leaning of the two mattes, and then I will show you the eye look that I did with that. I was going off the promo images where that shade looked quite black, and I couldn't tell if it was just Nocturnal Bloom layered really thickly or if it was possibly blended with something else. And I do think it might have been blended with something else to make it appear more black. So I think that's really cool. I think that's so cool that this could either be like a light blue green or a very dark gray leaning black, depending on how you use it. It's like a fun little party trick. So I will say most of her palettes have something like that, and I'm happy that this one does as well. So real quick, I'll pop up the black that I used to compare that one to. I mean, there was a couple. It's just a black shade. Next up is Twilight Lilac, which is definitely quite purple leaning, a very pink leaning purple, but still purple. For that, I actually pulled from Mothership 10 this purple that wound up being more similar than I expected it to be. And I don't mind this shade. I know it can look a little bruisey sometimes, especially on fair skin, but I don't know, at the end of the day, it's not unique, but it's not a bad color either. Then we get to everybody's either first or second favorite shade in this palette, which is Astral Iridescent Iris. So that is this guy. And I will say this is probably my favorite shade. This is the one I have featured on its own with nothing underneath it on my eye look today, and it is quite beautiful. It's a really pretty shimmer. This is another one that changes depending on what you pair it with. So in the next photo, I'm going to show this layered over all three mattes going down my hand, and then on the side, I have it on its own in different concentrations. So the closest to the swatch is going to be the most concentrated, and then further towards my wrist is more sheared out. So it is versatile in that way. I will say it is not duochrome. There is nothing duochrome about this. It just contains different shimmer particles. So it can lean more pink or more blue depending on what you pair it with, which is nice. I think that is very versatile. It actually reminded me a lot of some of the more recent Natasha Denona palettes that have had those sheer, almost clear bases with the different tones of shimmer. Again, as a topper shade, I feel like the formula of this feels very similar to that, which is one of my favorite formulas from Natasha Denona. So I'm not mad about this. It's just, again, it's not unique. This is a formula that we see all the time in indie brands. So very nice, but not groundbreaking. Because the Natasha Denona ones had very different undertones, the one that I found most similar was actually in Huda Beauty Rose Quartz. And that palette, the shade I'm pointing to, looked to be the most similar. And I feel like on the eyes, it would be a lot even more difficult to see the differences between them. If anything, I guess maybe the Pat McGrath one has a little bit less of a base, so it's not quite as reflective as the Huda, especially if you built the Huda Beauty shade up. I think it would appear a lot more blue, but regardless, at the end of the day, they're pretty similar. So still beautiful, but not totally irreplaceable. Then we come to Cosmic Fantasies, which is this burgundy metallic, and you know it's a dime a dozen. It's a burgundy metallic. That's never going to be my favorite on my skin tone. It's just not something that I feel is super flattering on me. So if you asked me to look at this palette and pick one to replace, that would be the one I said, we can replace that one. I don't need that one. It's fine. It's not offensive. It's just not something that I know I'm going to reach for very often. For that, I actually found a very similar shade in one of her holiday releases. And this also feels very similar in formula. I know they're both made in Italy. I do think the Mothership is definitely elevated. It's not the same formula as in this, but this particular shade is definitely the closest. And I don't think on the eyes I would ever be able to tell a difference. Moving on to Lunar Nectar right here. I'm going to call this a matte. I know that there's shimmer in it, but the shimmer is so negligible. If you had a magnifying glass on the eyes, you could see it, but I don't think it's detectable, and I'm happy, I'm glad, because I don't want shimmer in my matte. Like, I'm good. I sort of knew by having other palettes with this in it that it wasn't going to ruin the matte, that I was still going to be able to use it as a matte. I just think it's useless. I think it's a waste of shimmer, but whatever. It is what it is. This is probably one of my favorite matte tones from her. I do like the cooler tone pink on my skin tone. I do find it flattering. So for that reason, this is one that I'm going to reach for a lot. lot. I think it is very useful, so I'm happy to have it. To find a dupe of this, I again reached for Mothership 10, and the one I'm pointing to, that shade was way closer than I expected it to be. In the pan, they look a lot more different than I feel like it translated on the skin. And obviously keep in mind that these are swatches and everybody's undertones are different, but at least on me, and I am mostly neutral, these were actually pretty close. So if you have that palette, you might have an idea of what to expect with this. Next up is Astral Eden Envy. So this is that dirty gold shade. And I know a lot of people are calling this green, and I'll definitely say it is a greeny gold, but I still feel like it's more gold forward than anything. So that's how I would describe it, like an antique gold. I think this is a fun shade. This isn't something that I'm going to reach for a ton because darker shades all over the lid just aren't the most flattering on my more mature face. When I was younger, I think grungier looks were more flattering. I am never going to stop wearing shimmer. Even if I'm 95, I'm not going to stop wearing shimmer, but I'm not going to go out of my way to do looks that I don't like on myself. So that's just my truth. I think other people might have a different experience with it, and it is a really fun shade. In swatches, I thought it was quite similar to the one here on the screen. Because this shade has like a black base to it that you can't really see in this picture, it looks like it's mostly very bright yellow. Knowing that it had a black base, I thought it would be even more similar on the skin than it wound up being. To get a better comparison than just the swatches, I actually did competing eye looks, one with Petalmorphosis and one with this palette. And as you can see, the one with the older Mothership does actually translate to a brighter yellow on the eyelid. So they were less of a dupe than they look like in swatch. But because I was so intrigued by that, I definitely wanted to give them a full comparison in case you have this Mothership and were interested in that shade. I actually kind of prefer the look of the brighter yellow because that lightens it and makes it more approachable for what I'm looking for in an eyeshadow, but I know this comparison has been made a lot, so I did want to sort of throw in my more fleshed out feelings between the two so you can get a better idea of how they compare. Next we get to the exciting green, which is the Blitz Radiant Rhapsody shade, and this is stunning. This is a really pretty green because even though it is just green, it does contain blue reflex. So even though I don't think on the eye you can see the blue, it does make it lighter and brighter and pop a lot more than if it didn't have those blue reflex. And again, I like anything that brings light to the eye, so I love this shade. I don't love all greens on me, but I do really like this one. For this comparison, I stepped outside of my Pat McGrath collection because there really isn't anything that was comparable, even in the holiday stuff. So I pulled this from my Nomad Ireland palette, and if I dug around even more, I might have been able to find something even closer, but I think this one was a pretty good match. And honestly, if you have a ton of green on the eye, the differences are probably not perceivable, although this is quite unique for Pat McGrath, and it is a really pretty shade. Then we have this peachy shade in the corner, which is Astral Sunset Splendor. And for that shade, I actually didn't get that close. I did pull this from Divine Rose too, but honestly, I have the new Natasha Denona Bloom palette, which probably contains something even closer. So it was my bad for not comparing it to that palette, but if you're just looking to compare these to Pat McGrath shades, these have different undertones and there's no two ways about it, but in an eye look, I don't know, I'd say they're pretty close at the very least. In case I didn't mention it also, and I'll talk about it again later, but none of these are baked shades. So even though I'm comparing them to baked shades from older Motherships, they are different in finish as well. And finally, in the bottom right corner, we have Blitz Bronze Supernova. Now, this is a very pretty cool tone leaning brown. So when I actually swatched this, I fell in love with it because a lot of these lean more copper, and anything that leans peachier, copper, orange, I don't like. I don't like that on my skin tone. So the fact that this was cooler leaning than what I expected really stood out to me, and I really actually like this shade a lot. I found this that was pretty comparable from the Rose Fire Nectar, I think it's called, that quad. and it was reasonably similar. I mean, listen, it's a brown metallic shimmer, so not earth-shattering, no matter how you slice it. But this is still a shade that I think I'm going to enjoy using, and I will talk about it again when I get to the eye looks that I did. For now, this is a roundup of the palette and a little discussion on each shade, and now I'm going to get into the different eye looks that I did. So day one, when I received the palette, I had to use the purple and the green because they're just definitely the most exciting to me in this palette, along with that green matte on the outer corner. I started with the two lighter mattes, which I'm just going to call pink for the sake of making it easier. So I used the lighter pink on the outer edge. I used the purple leaning matte underneath that, and then in my outer corner I used the green matte. Hopefully you can sort of see the difference where those overlap and it makes a deeper shade. Then on top of that, on my outer corner, I used the green, and I went in quite thickly with the purple shimmer because I really wanted to build up the purple undertone so that would come through and I would get a true purple to green look. I would say that worked very well. Now this reminds me of Mardi Gras, these colors, and I think they're stunning. Is it an everyday look for me? No, but it is fun and I do think it's flattering. So I'll definitely be doing that again. The next look I did was featuring this antique gold shade, and that was when I did an eye for an eye. So actually before I took a shower, I did the older Mothership, I washed it off, and then I did the newer one, and then I took a shower, and then I did 2 more eye looks after that. So that's how I was able to get 5 looks in less than 48 hours. So anyway, as you can see here, I really tried to get as close to a black shade as I could by layering the green and the pinks, and I think it worked. I think it is a gray leaning black, but is still really believable that I used black here. So I thought that was fun. For the next eye look, I wanted to focus on these peach and brown shimmers in the corner, and I did the same 3 mattes in the outer corner. This time I really kept the green matte to a minimum because I didn't want that to come through as green in any way. I wanted to keep it just a little bit just on the absolute outer corner to give it some mention but not to show through as green. So I think I was able to achieve that with that look, and as you can see here, the brown shimmer on the middle part of my lid, the peach shimmer on the inner corner. I think they're both very pretty shades, and then in my real inner corner, in my tear duct, is where I used Divine Dawn, so that's the skin brightening shade on its own. For my fourth look, I wanted to feature the purple shimmer, but I wanted to bring out as much purple as I could. So I really relied on the purple pink mattes for that, again with a touch of the green matte just for deepening's sake. And I didn't use any of the mattes on my inner corner here, but I did bring it a little bit onto the movable part of my eyelid, probably up until the center where my iris is. So it would be kind of an ombre effect, I guess, with it being lighter to more purple leaning. I don't know that all of that translated. When you look at this, it was just sort of what was in my head, what I was going for. But I do think it brings the purple out, and it is quite pretty. Finally, for my look today, I wanted to use the same shade, but bring out more of the blue reflex that it contains. So I relied very heavily on the green matte on my outer corner, and I brought it across the eye as well. The same as what I did before with the pinker leaning purple shades, which I did use a little bit to sort of blend it out because I thought it was pretty. I do think you could use the deep green shade with a lighter hand and get the same effect. I just prefer the pink on me, so that's why I added it. But anyway, as you can see here, relying more on the green matte and layering the purple shade on top of that. I'll put the swatches up again so you can see that, how that makes more of the blue reflex show through, and I think that worked. It's still very purpley pink, but a little bit more blue. Anyway, I think today's look is very pretty. I'm happy with it, and I'm genuinely happy with this palette. I mean, listen, at the end of the day, that purple shimmer is very everyday friendly, so that's one of the shades that's going to make this more useful day to day. The pink inner corner is very everyday friendly as well. I think all the mattes are everyday friendly, and then the 2 shimmers are on the end are as well. Some people might gravitate more to the peach. I gravitate more to the brown, but either way, this can be a very versatile and useful palette in my opinion. So for that reason, I am happy I picked it up. I will say, and I should have started the video by saying this, I forgot, don't pay full price for this. If you have not picked this up yet, do not pay full price for this. Get this during the Sephora sale. Save, I think, $26, maybe $27. At that point, it's still like a $100 palette. It's still expensive, but if you're on the fence, either buy it then for 20% off, or if you're not Rouge, wait for a Pat McGrath sale because she often has up to 30% off at various times throughout the year. I 1000% think that this one is going to go on sale at some point and it'll be a much more reasonable price. I think on sale, this can be a worth it palette. However, if you are somebody that thinks that this gives similar vibes to the Dragon palette, I will pop up a side-by-side swatch. I think it's been debunked that this is actually similar. Those are like duochromes and multichromes, and they're just super different. But if we're talking purple and green, it does give off similar vibes, and for that reason, if you're deciding between the two, I say go with What's Up Beauty. That is way more exciting than this, and it's a way better price point. And the formula is comparable. I know people want to fight me on this, but indie brands have this formula and better, and sometimes you can even get them as singles, so you don't need to buy full palettes just to get the same look. I would say if you're not a huge Pat McGrath collector, which I am, as much as I don't want to admit that, you probably don't actually need this palette, but if you still want it after all of that, definitely only buy it on sale. So that sort of leads me into talking about what I've been able to find out about the baked shades not being in these palettes anymore. Rather than go on for another 20 minutes about this, I'm going to try to be concise and summarize this by saying, until Pat McGrath Labs comes out and makes an official statement about where the baked shades went, it is all going to be speculation. Do I think they will ever do that? Absolutely not. I don't think we're ever going to get that from Pat McGrath Labs. However, because there has been so much speculation on why they are no longer in the palettes, I've done some digging because I'm curious too. I wanted to know mostly if we had to worry about older palettes having changes, because if this was due to a lab change or financial trouble, it might affect those older palettes, and I was afraid of that. So I did some digging, and somebody actually commented on one of my previous videos who knows somebody that works for Pat McGrath that was super helpful by explaining to me that this was mostly because of Sephora, that the customers at Sephora either didn't want the baked shades or Sephora had an issue with one of the ingredients, which I, for the life of me, could not find. And I went through every single ingredient in some of those astral shades. It took me forever. I even contacted cosmetic chemists to see if I could get somebody to shed more light on this. That was a dead end, but it doesn't even matter because it's a decision that they've made. So anyway, according to this person, they sell too much through Sephora. They have to bend to what sells best at Sephora US. I'm only talking about the US. I know for a fact that they're still selling motherships in Sephora's outside of the US. I'm not talking about that at all, but it does affect the palettes, the new palettes internationally. So anyway, I don't believe we are going to see any more baked shades at motherships that are sold at Sephora. We still might get a limited edition release from Pat McGrath's in the future with the baked shades, but that's not a guarantee. And I'm sad about it. I'm sad about it because that was the formula that stood out the most. That is what made Pat McGrath so special, in my opinion. It might have been different 10 years ago, but now we have so many beautiful Italian formulas even from indie brands that are just as good to me. Just talking about my personal opinion here. Please don't come for me. This is just how I feel with the collection that I have. The other thing I wanted to talk about really quick about the formula changes is I know over on TikTok, I heard a ton of people say that the reason that they had to change the baked formulas was because of a banned ingredient that happened in 2025. That's PTFE. The problem with that is, yeah, it happened, but it was only ever in the mattes. In her older motherships, she does have PTFE, which has been banned by Sephora US, but it never affected the bake shades because it was never in them in the first place. So I did want to also bring that up and say, if you don't want to use eyeshadows with PTFE, it is a PFAS, so it's not the best thing to be putting on your eyeballs. It is still considered safe by the FDA, but I don't think you'd be crazy if you don't want to use those mattes anymore. That's where I stand. I'm not into fear-mongering, and I did, again, try to get in touch with a cosmetic chemist because I wanted an actual expert to talk about that, because I think those are the people that should be talking about it, not people with no background, or worse, people who just want to go viral and get attention for saying that this is so terrible. I wanted a balanced perspective. I wasn't able to get one. So my takeaway was, out of an abundance of caution, I'm probably going to stop using her older mattes, but I don't even care because I don't think any of them were that great to begin with, so I feel like it's like no loss. I'm not going to use her older mattes, but whatever. I'm also not throwing anything away, and if I accidentally use one of them when I'm just doing my makeup, I'm not going to freak out. I think it's fine. For the fun of it, I did a test. I used her old mattes next to her new mattes, and the formula changes, and I think if anything, the new mattes are even better than the old ones. So I have no problem there. I'm just really bringing it up to emphasize that's not why we're not getting the bake shades anymore. So anyway, I guess I'm just happy that it's not affecting the older palettes, so people will still be able to get them. You know, if this was a lab change or a problem with them making the formula from a financial standpoint and there was no alternative place to purchase those formulas, I would be more upset. I'm glad that I have the collection that I do and that I can still enjoy those old Blitz Astral formulas the way they were originally. I'm happy with that. I mean, I feel like that formula was very smooth, very reflective, stunning. I know some people complained about fallout from the shimmers, but I didn't care. I used glitter glue and I was happy because it outperformed everything else in my collection. But who knows, all hope is not lost because they can still make them, so maybe we'll see them again someday. Finally, I'm going to talk about my experience on launch day and how that really didn't go as planned. And while I don't believe I let it affect my review in any way, it is definitely going to affect my purchasing decisions going forward. So I may not buy another one of these at launch. I may only buy them at other retailers going forward because it was such a negative experience with customer service. So to start, this was released on Thursday morning. It was supposed to be at 8 a.m. with the discount code PETAL10. I set multiple alarms because I really wanted to get this special edition purple packaging. I also knew from a text that came the night before that they said the first 100 palettes were going to get a signature. I didn't for the life of me think that I would be one of the first 100 because at the end of the day, I feel like that's internet speed and luck, but whatever. I was still going to try because why not? If I'm going to be making the purchase anyway, I might as well try for that. So my first alarm went off around 7:40. So I was doing other stuff. I didn't drop everything. But at 7:43, I did hop on the website because I figured I might as well sign in so that I'm ready to check out and I can check out as quickly as possible. So when I did that, I clicked over to the website at 7:43 a.m., so 17 minutes before launch, thinking I had plenty of time. I noticed that the palette was already for sale. And not only that, they had a little checkbox underneath. And when I read the statement, it said, check this box if you want to opt out of getting a signature. So obviously I didn't dwell on it. I looked at that. I said, okay, well, I certainly don't want to check that. I checked out. I didn't even have time to see if the code was working. I paid full price. So with tax, it was almost $140. Anyway, it went by in a blur because I didn't want to check into shipping, faster shipping, whatever. I just wanted to check out so that I could be part of the first 100 or at least have a chance to be. I get my order confirmation, then a few minutes go by. And I decide that checkbox thing was weird. So I went back on the website to read it again. This time it said, uncheck this box if you want to opt out. So the default was checked just as the default before was unchecked. so that in order to not get an autograph, you would have to take an action to make it harder for people to make a mistake. However, the entire thing changed. It went from checking it to unchecking it. So because I felt like I was losing my mind, I dropped everything and I emailed customer service and I was like, listen, I see that this has changed. I just want to double check that I am opted in because I don't want to somehow automatically be opted out because this has changed on your end. I sent the email, whatever. A few minutes later, I hear from a friend of mine on Instagram that not only are they having trouble getting their code for the 10% off to work, but they saw the change in the checkbox as well. This was a blessing to me at this point because I genuinely felt like I was going crazy. I felt like I was losing my mind and seeing things and checkboxes and the whole nine. So she confirmed that I was not in fact losing it and it was changing. She waits till 10 a.m. and then she's able to use her code. After she checks out, she goes back on the website and looks a third time, and it seems the message has changed again. They changed this statement 3 different times. Finally, the third time, it let you see in your receipt that you were opted in or out. So they made an improvement to it. They made it easier for people to make sure that they were in the running for this. But there's no two ways about it. The fact that they changed it 3 times is a mess, and they shouldn't have done that. In my opinion, it should have just been the first 100 orders. And actually, the friend of mine on Instagram who told me about this did email customer service. She actually got a person. I think their European customer service might be different from their American customer service because I only ever got AI responses until 6 days later when I did finally get a person. I'll talk about that in a minute. But she got a person almost immediately and they told her that it would just be the first 100 orders. So my heart got lighter at that point because I felt like even if the checkbox thing was a disaster, I should be opted in because I was part of the first 100. But regardless, anybody who did win an autograph would get an email the next day letting them know that they did in fact win. So 24 hours goes by, a bunch of people get emails. 2 people showed receipts and I was able to see that they checked out after I did. So I checked out at 7:43. These 2 women checked out at 7:45. They got emails confirming that they got autographs, so I figured if they just go by the first 100, I should be okay. But I never got an email. And at that point, I just knew that this wasn't going to work out for me. So I kept fighting, and finally I got through to a person on customer service who finally looked at my order and she said, yeah, you ordered in time, but you opted out of getting an autograph. It didn't matter that I explained to her that not only did I not opt out of getting an autograph, but I emailed them to be extra redundant and make sure that I was not opted out. Another 2 days go by, no response. Finally, I get through to a person again and they said, we were busy that day. That was it. No, I'm sorry. No, you're right. This was our fault. I didn't expect that. At that point, I was just looking for somebody to acknowledge. I didn't think they could fix it. I guess at first I thought maybe they could fix it, but then I sort of gave up. I just wanted a human being who works for Pat McGrath to look at this and be like, yeah, you got screwed. I never got that. But I guess I did get a human to say, oh, we were too busy. So that was the best I was going to get from the brand. What grinds my gears about all of this is that it was so easily avoidable. None of this should have happened. They never should have released before 8 a.m. If they had just not released before 8 a.m., I would have been able to use my code and save $13. If I was part of the first 100, cool. If not, that's fine. But being opted out in a way that was beyond my control, that should not have happened to me. I have 10 motherships, a whole bunch of quads and holiday stuff. I have been a loyal customer for a long time, and to get treated in this way isn't right. And I would also argue that anybody on that website buying this palette at launch is probably the same caliber of customer for them. None of us should have had to deal with this. I know some people were able to get a refund for their code after the fact. Like if they did check out before 8 a.m., they couldn't use their code. They might have been able to get that refund. I wasn't, but other people were. Cool, it was $13. Fine, but that never should have happened in the first place. I do vaguely remember them having a launch in the past that happened 10 minutes early. But there was nothing limited edition, nothing sold out. It wasn't the end of the world. This was an entirely different situation, and I think it should have been handled entirely different. People have lives. People are working to make the money that they need to buy your products. The least you could do is not release them at a time different than the time you tell people they are being released. It shouldn't be that difficult to do that. And while I am personally going to get over not having a signed palette, I'm sad about it because the chance was taken away from me by Pat McGrath Labs, and it would have meant a lot to me. Not everybody feels like that, but it would have meant a lot to me. She's still my favorite makeup artist. I still really like the products, and you know, I feel like everything that happened with Monica Bell on Instagram with the Star Wars palette and them blocking her, and she had like everything that they ever came out with, she bought. The way they treated her was disgusting, but I just made excuses. It was the social media team. Other people having bad customer service experience. Oh, it's just customer service. But at some point, it's just the brand itself. I understand that they had to downsize recently. I know that things aren't going that well for them. Pat McGrath herself is working with Louis Vuitton, so she's not even exclusively on board with them anymore. But I also think there's a loyal customer base here, and it would be so easy for them to fix these things. It kind of drives me crazy that they're not fixing these very simple issues. And all it would take was a little bit of respect and communication. But whatever. All I can do is use this information going forward, whether or not I want to purchase directly from the brand again. That depends. I guess I would if it was a limited edition only sold through them. But for Mothership, I think in the future I'll be buying it from Sephora, because even with this release, I would have gotten it faster if I waited to the next day and bought it at Sephora. I don't know why it took 9 days for this to get to me. That's another thing that I was disappointed in. You know, my channel is so small that if I had gotten an early review of this up, it could have helped my channel at least a little bit. Do I think it would have pushed me to 1,000 subscribers and I would have been able to monetize after this? No, probably not. That's probably not how much it would have helped me, but it could have given me a decent boost. Anybody who gets early reviews of stuff like this, especially with the Sephora sale around the corner, I feel like there's even more people looking for reviews of this than maybe during other times. It could have helped. It could have given me a big boost. It could have meant a lot. The last time I checked, she ships out of New Jersey and I'm in Florida, so a lot of times I get things next day. It's a 2-hour plane ride. It's not that far. When I looked at the tracking for this, it said Thursday night. It was still in New Jersey, so it didn't even leave New Jersey until Thursday night. It did get to me Friday afternoon, but most people already had reviews up by then. And yeah, maybe some of them paid for expedited shipping, which I didn't even see an option for. But I know some people didn't, and they still got it in 2 or 3 days. So I don't know what happened with that, but that's why this review is so much later than I had hoped. Again, this doesn't reflect the palette itself, but it does affect how I feel about the brand, how they're running things, and where I make my purchases going forward. So if you stuck around and you listened to me vent about all of that, thank you so much. I just needed to get it off my chest. And I've always heard people talk about shopping at Pat McGrath Labs and said, if you're a customer long enough, you'll have a bad experience. Just give it time. It did take some time for this to happen to me, but I understand what they're talking about. And more than anything that happened to me, I look at what happened to Monica, and that would be a reason, and a good one, to not purchase from them going forward. So that's not where I'm at yet, but I did want to mention that in case you're on the fence at all and wanted an excuse to save $128. You know, I think it's valid, and I don't think any of this is as special as it used to be. That could change, but at least as of now. My final thoughts is that overall, this is a very pretty color story. It's something that is approachable and fun. I'm gonna get a bunch of use out of this in the springtime. I don't really know how much it's going to lend itself to the rest of my collection, but at the end of the year, when I evaluate everything, my guess is that this is going to fall in the middle. I don't think it's going to be among my most used, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to be among my least used. That's my feeling, at least at this point, but I will definitely do an update probably in a few weeks, and then I'll do another update at the end of the year when I wrap up all of my palettes. But for now, those are my thoughts on the new Mothership 12 Petalmorphosis palette from Pat McGrath Labs. I hope it was helpful. My next video will be about the Sephora sale that starts on April 4th, and I'll be going through each category talking about my holy grails and what I think is and isn't worth it to pick up during that sale. I'm hoping to get that up by Thursday, but that's it for now. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you like content like this, and I hope you're having a beautiful day or night wherever you are. I hope you're taking care of yourself. I love you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.